Hello and welcome back to CEO.CA's Inside the Boardroom. Today I am joined by Duncan Middlemiss, President and CEO of Arizona Metals. Duncan, how are you doing today?
I'm doing great, James. Yourself?
I'm doing pretty great. I'm excited to talk about Arizona Metals. You joined the company approximately 4 months ago. Can you tell our viewers, what attracted you to Arizona Metals Corp and what have you been up to in your first 4 months?
Yeah, it was an interesting situation for myself. I've been involved in gold mining in the Abitibi for almost 30 years now. So I really didn't know the existence of Arizona Metals, to be quite frank. Typically, I was always looking for gold deposits north of the 49th parallel. And so obviously this didn't hit my screen. But when I was presented with the opportunity, I was kind of shocked by the high grade, high width situation that was evolving in Arizona near Black Canyon City. I think really when I went into the presentation and I saw like 93 meters of 8.2 grams per ton equivalent and 93 meters of, 125 meters of 2.2% copper equivalent, I was awed, to say the least. That definitely piqued my interest. So I did some due diligence with the team on site, and they were very impressive, to be frank. Great geological team, great permitting team, and I think it really convinced me that this was a very executable project. So essentially that certainly put the hook in there, and I decided to join the company.
Fantastic. And over the last 4 months or so, what have been the main focuses of your work?
Well, really trying to understand exactly where the project is. So there's been a significant amount of drilling done on the K project, resource drilling, and I think we all felt it was time to declare a maiden resource estimate on K itself. Looked at how much drilling could be, accounted for it, and I would say at that point it was probably another 15,000 meters. We feel that we'll be able to have that completed by the end of November, get all the assays in by December, and we'll be able to produce a maiden resource estimate, I'd say in the first half of 2025. So very important to put some parameters around this project. The issue being is, when investors and everybody look at projects, they always look at the size and the quality and the quantity, right? How big is it and what's the grade? And unfortunately, we have some great drilling results. However, you can't really summarize that into something cohesive like a mineral resource estimate. So that's the plan. Following up on that, we'd like to follow it with a PEA, preliminary economic assessment. That would be in the second half of 2025. And at that point, I think, the project would definitely have some defined parameters around it. You'd end up with your capital costs, your operating costs, your return on investment, everything that you need to do, plus next steps, because, these technical reports always come up with recommendations as, okay, what's next? So the company's done a really good job, I'd say, in sort of setting the framework for starting the early work for permitting. So doing baseline studies and all sorts of, archaeological studies, species at risk studies. The site is very clean when it comes to that. It's not archaeologically significant. There's no species at risk or plants that are, very very rare. So really sets up well. Arizona is a great jurisdiction.
Excellent. There's a lot to unpack there and a few things I'm going to circle back on, but maybe let's start with maiden resource estimate. You mentioned 15,000 meters of drilling. What other work needs to go into this project before we can see that MRE?
Yeah, so typically we'd have to do metallurgical testing, which is well underway. I'd say it's probably 40% complete. Of course, scoping study in terms of mining costs and things like that in order to really determine cutoff grades. So, and of course, baseline environmental in order to really understand, do we have a viable resource estimate? And that's all going to lead into the PEA, which would follow right on the tail of that. So everything is kind of, setting up for those events in 2025. So by the end of H1, we'll have an MRE. and by the end of H2, we'll have a PEA.
Fantastic. Well, lots of major catalysts to look forward to. You touched on Arizona there being a great district to operate in. Can you walk us through the permitting situation there? What's the current status for Arizona Metals?
Yeah, so really the K deposit sits really on private patented land. We've also got quite a landmass to the west of that, which is on BLM land, is what we call that. And we're in the process right now of we've applied for an exploration plan of operations, which would account for another, almost 60 drill pads and another, 28, 29 acres of disturbance. So really for us to properly explore that property, we really need to, kind of reach out to the west and get access to it. We've got some really good, high potential, I would say, exploration targets that we need to follow up on. And really, the company just hasn't had the, I would say, the location on the pads. They've been inopportune, to say the least. So I think that's where we're headed to right now.
Great. And in terms of infrastructure in place at site, can you walk us through, water, power, road access? Paint the picture for us.
Yeah, well, road access and power access is phenomenal. There's a state highway probably less than a mile away. There's all sorts of power there running right up. So essentially, this project is just off the highway, which runs between Phoenix and Flagstaff. So if anyone's ever headed north, and it's only about 45 minutes north of Phoenix, so it's very easily accessible. It's not remote in the least. So that certainly does help. In terms of like water permits, we already are permitted. I mean, historically, the mine site did have its own wells, and certainly we're fine for that currently. That we see no sort of impact in terms of watershed. The community nearby and downstream from where we are would definitely be sourcing alluvial aquifers. We've, in the course of doing our 120,000 meters of drilling deep into bedrock, we certainly have hit some water, and so that's a different animal altogether. It's a bedrock aquifer. So yeah, we see this definitely having a very executable future in terms of water usage and that. And modern day mines recycle 80% of their water, right? So it's not a huge consumer like it probably once was.
Great. And I guess just to review, some of the past work and maybe some of the geology you've been observing at the project, polymetallic VMS system, you're seeing copper, gold, silver, zinc. Walk us through, what people can expect in terms of, what is the main commodity focus going to be, and I guess how diversified really is the project?
Yeah, it's actually a perfect little blend of copper and gold. So there's two pretty hot metals when you look at it that way. The other metals we have in the deposit would be zinc and silver. So, I mean, historically, they sort of ran through, how to characterize the deposit. And of course, it's at sort of 100% recovery, but just to try to understand. And essentially, it's about 37% copper, 37% gold, 18% zinc, and 9% silver. So it's just a really nice polymetallic deposit. And I didn't have a lot of I would say experience with VMS deposits, and having understood it, and this is really why the property is so prospective, is because essentially it was 10 kilometers of seafloor, which would have had a lot of I would say action, because essentially the reason why things are happening is because the plates are rifting apart and allowing the magma, metal bearing magma, to come up from underneath. So this is all trapped and solidifies, and it gets folded up and then tips up. So basically 10 kilometers of seafloor now becomes 1.8 kilometers along strike. So, and basically going in an accordion shape, and you'd be able to just sort of follow along that prospective mineralized horizon. So that, and of course, is where we look and where we target. And we've got a couple of very interesting targets, but we just can't quite, drill them yet, because we don't have the plan of operations. the exploration. Yeah.
Understood. Thanks so much for that overview. I do want to touch briefly on Sugarloaf Peak. Earlier in this year, there was discussion around a spin-out that's been put on the back burner. Walk us through that decision and what it means for investors.
Yeah, well, there was actually two spinouts proposed at the time. Okay, so Sugarloaf Peak was the original asset that the company had, and it's a gold asset, fairly low grade, about half a gram. It had a historic resource of about 1.5 million ounces, and that was going to get spun out, as was a 2% NSR on the K deposit. K deposit has no current royalty on it or streams or anything else. Very unusual for a deposit which was likely found about 100 years ago. So happy about that. I think when myself and our chairman Jacques came in at the same time, sort of mid-May, we were kind of faced with it because it was coming up for a shareholders vote at the AGM, and it just wasn't enough time for us to really properly dig in and assess it. I think it was Jacques that probably said, we spent our lives looking for other assets to kind of spin one out right now without having a proper assessment. Maybe we should just pause, and I totally saw the same thing as that. As far as the 2% spin out on K, I think it's probably going to be more valuable once we get an MRE and a PEA in there, and you would like to have it for perhaps project financing in the future, where I think it would be a little more hefty.
Great. Well, Duncan, just to wrap up here, would love to hear your perspective. Obviously, there's some big catalysts coming up in the new year, but why is now an interesting time for investors to get involved with Arizona Metals Corp, and what sets you apart from some of your competition?
I think if you look at the deposit, the K deposit on its own is a fantastic deposit. It's definitely designed to be mined underground. That's what I'm here. I'm not really an open pit aficionado, so happy to bring it underground. Underground, of course, has got a much smaller footprint on surface. Again, leading to the permittability of this project, right? I think the exploration potential on K also is, we definitely have one K deposit. Is there another K deposit or even another one? So the potential here on that property is quite large. So I think, looking at the priorities for us right now, it's, priority 1A is to do the mineral resource drilling, get the mineral resource done by the end of H1, get the PEA done by the end of H2. So that's the K mine proper. On the K mine property exploration, which is really the BLM lands to the west, where we've got a lot of this potential, stratigraphy, which, definitely needs to be explored. We're just currently waiting for the exploration plan of operations to be approved. We don't see any, issue with that. It's just going to take a little bit of time. I would consider likely, the first quarter of 2025, and then we'd be able to do a proper job of the exploration there. And then really further down the food chain, I would say, is definitely Sugarloaf Peak. It does seem to be high potential along strike, high potential at depth. There's good metallurgical recoveries here. The oxide portion is 95% recoverable. The sulfide is 85% recoverable, which is really high recovery based on the grade. If we're able to expand that along strike or at depth, I think that, perhaps the historic resource of 1.5 million ounces grows and becomes much more interesting. So it just gives the company that many more options moving forward after we, do a small program, maybe 10,000 meters of RC drilling and fully understand what we have.
Great. Well, Duncan, appreciate your overview on those projects today. Sounds like there's a lot of exciting updates in store for Arizona Metals in the near future. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, James. Thanks for having me.